Our world's in crisis, and like many others, I think that science has contributed to the many ecological problems we're now facing. But I also think that science has the answer.
In this time of increasing environmental problems, we need a science that not only makes us clever, but also makes us wise.
I'm a scientist, and I really value science and technology. After all, they've revolutionized our lives in a very short time frame and given us a fantastic understanding of the world. But they've also contributed to the potentially catastrophic consequences of our unsustainable lifestyles.
I'm resident ecologist at Schumacher College in Devon, which I helped to start 20 years ago.
This is the Amazon rainforest, or it was the Amazon rainforest. Can you see these little patches here? Those are patches of forest that have been left when the rest of the forest has been cleared for agriculture. And
One of our intentions was to explore a new kind of science, which could balance rational knowledge with intuitive wisdom. Now people come here from all over the world to explore the causes of the ecological crisis and to look for sustainable solutions. But my relationship with science wasn't always like this. 30 years ago, I underwent a transformation that convinced me that there had to be more to science than conventional analytical reasoning.
I've always had a passion for the natural world. It's what led me into science, first as a student of zoology at Durham University, and then here to Oxford, where I completed a doctorate on the ecology and behaviour of the muntjac deer. And it was during my time here that I first began to realise that there was something seriously limited about science, wonderful though it was.
For my doctorate, I had to spend many years studying muntjac deer in their natural woodland habitat. I methodically collected reams of data about their movements, food habits, and social behaviour. Day and night, I sucked the numbers out of my woodland study site, much like a machine, recording them in my notebooks for analysis later in the university's computers. I became a detached observer, remote, as if looking down from on high. The inspiration that had taken me into science in the first place was drying up, and I began to live in a world of abstraction, of quantities. But there were also times when I put down my notebooks and just leant against a tree. As I looked up into the green world of the canopy, I became conscious of a different and deeper way of knowing the wood. A way of knowing that I had totally forgotten when I was just collecting data. In these moments, I connected with a powerful sense of the wood as a whole being in its own right, with its own moods, its own intelligence, in short, with its own qualities. And I felt a similar intuitive sense of oneness with the deer. As I watched them, a gentle feeling of calmness enveloped me, and that intuitive connection has inspired me down the years.
Could it be that I had within me two ways of relating to nature? The first, a numerical mind, which extracted quantities and data from the wood, and a second, an intuitive mind that connected me with the qualities of the wood, bringing with it a deep sense of meaning and a connection with the entire breathing earth.
This transformative experience with the muntjac and their wood convinced me that intuition has a major role to play in science. But what exactly is intuition?
So intuition is a very subtle thing. It involves intelligence, it involves reason, it involves judgment and experience, as well as emotional engagement and also detachment. So it's really the ultimate of what we can do.
One way of understanding intuition is that it's something that comes towards us from a deeper level than our rational mind. But it comes with a certain authenticity and a certain depth in it. And so it gives us a deeper perspective on things.
Intuition ultimately grounds everything, including reason, that it sends off to do certain limited tasks. And it then uses that information and reintegrates it into the whole picture. That is so important to understand, because it both validates reason and yet puts it in its proper place.
So perhaps my two ways of relating to nature, the task-based numerical one and the intuitive one, were out of balance. And just like many of us, I hadn't understood that intuition is a valid way of knowing. But intuition wasn't always regarded as the poor relation of reason.
The ancient Greeks didn't create a division between the intuitive mind and the rational or numerical mind, did they? How did they see these two ways of seeing?
No, they didn't create a division, but they had a distinction. And they represented this distinction in their two words for knowledge, gnosis and episteme. So they had separate words for these two ways of knowing, whereas we only have one. And so the Greeks certainly would connect gnosis with intuition, with participatory relationships, where your imagination was free to reach the other, whereas episteme was much more like the rational mind. How you thought about it afterwards. About is the crucial thing here.
So they unified these two minds. They knew when to use them and which was appropriate in given circumstances.
Yes, I think that's the secret. They knew when to use them.
And this unity between the numerical and intuitive minds allowed the Greeks to form a different kind of connection with the earth, an animistic one. Plato, for example, said, "This world is indeed a living being supplied with soul and intelligence. A single visible entity containing all other living entities."
So for the founders of Western culture, that's our culture, everything was full of meaning. And this essentially animistic understanding of nature shaped our thinking from the time of the ancient Greeks right up until the beginning of the scientific revolution in the 16th century.
Now scientists began to see nature as inanimate, as a mechanical system, and human beings as superior, as standing outside of nature and above nature. And the aim of technology became not to cooperate with nature or to mimic nature, to learn from nature, but rather to dominate nature.
And this domination of nature became the main focus of science.
Galileo, for example, said, "The only thing that counts is what can be counted. Anything else is irrelevant. The qualities that we feel in the world, the sense of vastness that we feel when we see the ocean, the sense of height and depth when we're up in the mountains, all of those things tell us nothing real about the world at all. They must be disregarded."
Galileo wasn't alone in creating this new worldview. Across Europe, reductionism was gaining ground. It was supported by influential thinkers such as the philosopher and mathematical physicist René Descartes, who thought that the universe was a mere machine. And for Descartes, this meant that everything in the physical world, rocks, streams and animals, were inanimate, without soul or value. For him, only humans had souls, which enabled them to understand the world through rational scientific analysis. This attitude paved the way for Descartes and his followers to cut open live animals in the name of science. When these animals howled in pain, Descartes told his students to ignore them because the howls were only the creakings of machines.
Conventional science uses essentially the empirical senses, looking, seeing things, measuring them, and getting all these quantitative aspects of their behavior, which we can then put into mathematical relationships and find out what are the rules of organization of these systems. And then we can predict what they do. And of course, that has been extraordinarily successful.
When you come to the Enlightenment, I think what happens is that science has realized that it can be very powerful by doing certain exploitative things, by using the rationalizing and numerical mind. It can become very powerful, and that's very seductive. But the trouble is that, of course, what it begins to lose sight of is that there are things that cannot be captured by that. There's kinds of knowledge that simply can't be captured in that form.
Of course, the scientific revolution gave us many benefits, and scientists were only trying to make sense of a world torn apart by religious wars, plagues, and natural disasters.
But there was one key mistake in this worldview that has been perpetrated down the centuries, that this mathematical way of understanding the world is the only way to understand the world.
And this limited view means that we see the world made of fragments, rather than as an interconnected whole. No wonder we feel disconnected from nature. By allowing us to become a major force on the planet, conventional science has inadvertently helped to create the global crisis. But things are shifting.
There are two kinds of science, one that has a very short history, a mechanistic reductionist science, which empties the earth and all life, of life. That's the idea of terra nullius, of dead matter, nature as dead matter, just materials for factories as raw material. And the other view that's both ancient as well as highly modern is the recognition that every aspect of this earth, the soil, the water, the trees, the microbes, the air, are living systems, self-organizing systems, vibrant, vital with life.
The sort of science I'm talking about, where people are inside the ecosystem, you can't do it just in terms of quantities because you're present and you're using all your intuition, your feelings, your sensing, your ways of knowing, all the different ways of knowing you're using to get knowledge, relevant knowledge about that system, so that you can participate in it in an appropriate way.
It's time for a science fit for the 21st century, a holistic science that combines our numerical and intuitive minds so that we can participate with nature rather than dominate it.
Holistic science offers a way out of the ecological crisis by giving us a method for exploring the qualities we find in nature.
If you talk to a naturalist or a beekeeper, they will say, well, I can feel when something is wrong. I can see it and I can feel it. And I can hear it in the behavior of the bees, or if you're out in an ecosystem, you can get it from the qualities of the ecosystem that you're tuning into. Now, qualities are things that are normally left outside of conventional science. By qualities, what I mean is things like the beauty of a landscape, the vitality, the well-being, or within ourselves, pain, joy, love. These are all qualities. And they're regarded as outside the domain of science because we can't measure them.
The emphasis that holistic science places on qualities gives us a revolutionary way of being in the world. It also provides a new method for understanding the relationship between parts and wholes.
The kind of thinking is different, and this is what is called systems thinking or systemic thinking. It is thinking in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns, in terms of connections, of context, and also in terms of processes. So there are certain shifts of emphasis from objects to relationships, from measuring to mapping, from objective knowledge to contextual knowledge. The relationships are not just relationships among the parts of a system, but also relationships between the system as a whole and its larger environment.
One of the roots of holistic science can be found in the 19th century in the work of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, someone you'd associate more with literary classics such as Faust. But Goethe was also a great scientist and naturalist, credited with the discovery of the human intermaxillary bone, part of the upper jaw. Rather like Plato, Goethe saw each creature as a pattern gradation of one great harmonious whole. His scientific method invites scientists to actively participate with whatever they're studying, by slowing down and really looking, really paying attention. It's much more revealing than it sounds.
Attention is a remarkable thing. A machine can't attend, only a consciousness can attend. And what attention does is to bring a world about. It's not a passive process. So there's something in us that responds to whatever it is out there that tells us something about the kind of attention that we need to pay.
I'm going to practice Goethe's approach by paying attention to this plant, the smooth sow thistle, Sonchus oleraceus. As a biologist, my immediate urge is to allow my numerical mind to come up with theories and explanations about why the plant is the way it is. Instead, using Goethe's method, I'll focus very carefully on the details of the plant's physical appearance. Goethe called this stage exact sensorial perception, posh language for looking carefully with an open mind. I'm observing and drawing the leaves of the plant in sequence, starting with the leaves nearest the ground and working my way up the stem to the flowers and seeds. As I do this, I'm learning about the patterns and relationships between the parts of the plant, how the leaves relate to each other, how a leaf shape lower down the plant morphs into a leaf shape higher up the stem. Goethe called the next phase exact sensorial imagination. In other words, carefully visualizing the development of the plant in the mind's eye. I can use my detailed drawings and my memory of leaf sequences to visualize the entire growth process of any plant. In this way, I can see the plant flowing from seed to maturity. It's showing me how its underlying wholeness reveals itself differently in each leaf, each flower, and in every so-called part of the plant.
But how could this intuitive experience of the plant be useful to me as a scientist? Well, Goethe himself provides an excellent example.
In 1790, he published his intuitive insight that flowers are in fact modified leaves. Over 200 years later, in 2001, this contribution to science was finally validated when scientists tracked down the genes involved in turning embryonic leaves into flowers.
Goethe was a visionary and a rebel. He turned his back on the reductionist science of his peers, and instead he focused on patterns, connections and relationships. In doing so, he laid the foundations for the science that we so desperately need in the 21st century.
Goethe's science is consistent with a holistic way of thinking, which focuses on relationships and the meaningful complexities of all living systems.
Every single leaf on this tree is different from each other. And so if we take any two leaves and look at them, we can find all kinds of differences between them. But we have to look in some detail to see the differences, because overall they look similar. But this has 5 lobes and this has 6 lobes. And each one of these leaflets actually is different from the other. Different numbers of veins, different angles and so on. And yet generically they look similar. So we have a kind of paradox that each part is free to do as it pleases, but it keeps a certain relationship with the whole, so that overall you've got this property of coherence or health or vitality.
We don't see the world any longer as a mechanical system, as a machine consisting of fundamental constituents, basic building blocks, but rather we have realized that the material world ultimately is a network of patterns of relationships. We also have realized that the planet as a whole is alive, is a living, self-regulating, self-organizing system.
And we can only sense that the Earth is a great living being when our intuitive and numerical minds are in balance. The ancient Greeks had a name for the living Earth. They called her Gaia, the steadfast base of all things.
Gaia found her way back into modern consciousness in the 1960s through the British scientist James Lovelock, who was employed by NASA to look for life on Mars. Lovelock was contemplating data on the compositions of the atmospheres of Venus, Earth and Mars when his intuitive mind gave him the hugely important insight that the Earth is alive, a gigantic living being on the scale of an entire planet. Lovelock's numerical mind then took the lead and developed his intuitive insight of a living planet into a whole new theory of the Earth. He called it Gaia theory.
Well, it is science that took us to the moon, which allowed us to see the Earth as a whole. And it is science in James Lovelock's theory that allowed us, a few years after that, to see the Earth as a whole and regulating itself intelligently. But interestingly enough, it was a classicist, William Golding, who gave the name of Gaia to James Lovelock for his systems theory. And he went back to the last time the Earth as a whole was considered sacred, by which I mean was considered as a living, animate presence.
Gaia was the name that the ancient Greeks gave to the divinity of the Earth. Gaia theory suggests that our planet actively regulates its surface conditions over vast spans of time, thanks to a series of complex feedbacks between living beings, the atmosphere, water, and rocks. Before Gaia theory, scientists thought that life couldn't possibly affect the Earth in any major way. But thanks to Lovelock, we now realize that living beings make a huge contribution to keeping our planet habitable. I first encountered James Lovelock and Gaia theory here at Schumacher College in 1991, when he taught the college's very first course. Because of Lovelock's view of the Earth, I saw how the various disciplines of science fitted together to create an integrated vision of life on Earth. Gaia theory is based on scientific principles that satisfy the most rigorous requirements of the numerical mind. And if we allow our intuition to work with it, Gaia theory can give us a deep intuitive knowing that the Earth is animate, alive, deserving of our deepest respect. I want to do something that's never been done before. I'm going to combine Goethe's method with Gaia theory. I'll give a brief glimpse into one of the Earth's most important life-sustaining processes, the long-term carbon cycle, a great example of how the Earth regulates its own temperature. It's Gaia theory in action. I've come to a place that I consider not only beautiful, but also the perfect embodiment of the carbon cycle, the great granite refrigerator, Dartmoor.
So in this hand I'm holding a little piece of granite, and in this hand a little piece of chalk. And who would have thought that the relationship between these two kinds of rock has kept the Earth habitable for 3,500 million years? This rock, the granite, has helped to cool the Earth, and this rock, the chalk, has helped to warm it up.
To begin with, I'll use Goethe's exact sensorial perception. I can't see all the relationships in the long-term carbon cycle, like I can see the leaves of a plant, because invisible atoms and molecules are involved. But I can use the scientific details of the cycle to give me an in-depth, rational understanding of what happens. I'm not going to explain the whole of the carbon cycle, but I hope to give you a flavour of just how intelligent our planet really is.
Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, so the more of it there is in the air, the higher the Earth's temperature. The first step in the process is when rainwater combines with carbon dioxide to form a mild acid called carbonic acid. It's the same acid that you have in bottles like this of fizzy water. Only here the carbon dioxide is under a lot of pressure, so when I open the bottle, the carbon dioxide is going to be released. You see all those bubbles of carbon dioxide. Now that carbonic acid, which has been created by rainwater mixing with carbon dioxide in the air, then finds its way down to the granite rock, like this. And the minute it makes contact with the granite rock, this acid begins to remove calcium ions that are hidden inside the rock. And then the calcium ions combine with the carbon from the atmosphere to form a chalky solution of calcium bicarbonate. And this calcium bicarbonate then finds its way into the groundwaters and eventually will find its way into the River Dart, way down below. So the River Dart is actually full of calcium bicarbonate, which in turn came from the chemical weathering of granite rock.
Plants, lichens, mosses, bacteria and fungi growing on the rock help the granite weathering to happen up to 1,000 times faster. They crack open the granite with their roots into millions of tiny fragments, onto which they exhale carbon dioxide and water. In this way, anything growing on the granite helps to cool the Earth. Now, what about chalk's role in the long-term carbon cycle?
We've left our calcium ions and our carbon atoms in the river, and of course they're flushed down to the sea. And in the sea, there are tiny marine algae, some of them are called coccolithophores, that take up the calcium bicarbonate solution deep into their bodies, where they precipitate the chalky solution of calcium bicarbonate into solid chalk. Now, when these algae die, their bodies sink down to the bottom of the ocean, and over time, vast deposits of chalk and limestone are created, made up entirely out of the dead bodies of these tiny marine algae.
So when you see chalk and limestone, what you're actually seeing is solidified carbon dioxide. Every carbon atom in the chalk was once in the atmosphere. Eventually, some of the Earth's tectonic movements push the chalk deep underground, where it melts to release its carbon atoms. Some of these find their way back into the atmosphere via volcanoes, which stops the Earth from freezing over. These complex feedback relationships between life, rocks, water and atmosphere have kept the planet suitable for life by regulating the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere over geological time. So that was a taste of the long-term carbon cycle using Goethe's exact sensorial perception.
Now I want to explore the same cycle using his exact sensorial imagination.
And I'll do this step by step, by visualizing the whole process again in my mind's eye, so I'm no longer dominated by my rational mind. I want to experience the wholeness of Gaia using my intuitive mind, so that I can feel the relationships between air, rocks, water, and living beings, the powerful interactions that sustain life. I'm beginning to participate in Gaia's evolutionary journey. I can feel myself belonging to the living Earth. And that means that my feelings towards the Earth are not based on separation or objectivity, but on a partnership. Through this intuitive experience, I feel that I've had a glimpse into the very core of matter itself. I now understand that atoms not only come together in complex ways to create the Earth, just like leaves and stems come together to create a plant, but they are also animate, containing the awareness from which our very own consciousness arises. And by allowing this science-based reverence for nature into our everyday lives, I believe it can help us through the ecological crisis, because it helps transform our relationship to everything in the world, even our food.
Here we are preparing some hors d'oeuvres with some cheese and biscuits. Oscar and I. Oscar is my son. And, you know, it's a very mundane thing to be doing, really, isn't it?
Except it's Friday.
Except it's Friday. But in fact, this is very special because all the atoms in this cheese biscuit, in the cucumber, in Oscar, in the carrots, in myself, in the knife,
In you?
they were formed when a great star exploded.
About 65 billion years ago, the Big Bang.
And those atoms then created a disk of dust, and that dust eventually coalesced itself into the planet Earth and the other planets. And ever since then, those atoms have been cycling around the Earth in various ways, picking up the experiences of their adventures through the crust into the atmosphere, and then when life evolved, of course, into living beings, back out into the atmosphere, back into the ocean, endlessly for thousands of millions of years. And all of that experience is right here in these atoms. So you see, this gives us a science-based reason for revering everything around us.
And I believe that this approach to nature, where we see matter as animate, can improve the way we connect with the natural world every day.
Here I am washing up, or at least trying to. And, you know, this water that's coming through from the tap, it started out as ice meteors and comets from outer space, and actually crashing into the Earth, delivering the water, this very water itself. Some of the other water came through volcanoes long, long ago. And ever since the water's been on the planet, it's been cycling round and round the water cycle for thousands of millions of years, in and out of clouds and ocean, later on in and out of living beings, for example, through tree roots, through the trunks of trees, and then out through the leaves and back to the atmosphere, then back as rain. So just think of the amazing experiences that this water has had. Then it'll go down the drain and go back to the River Dart, perhaps, and then come back as rain. So I can connect with the great cycles of the Earth simply by washing up. And so this animistic view really helps us to develop a powerful reverence for everything in the world.
Whether it's a plant, or one of the Earth's great life-sustaining cycles, or even just the feeling of beauty in a wood, holistic science gives us a method for connecting with the qualities in our world in a rigorous way. When we do this, we no longer see separate entities in isolation. Instead, we realize that everything on the Earth is deeply interconnected.
Once we've seen the Earth from the moon, we can see the Earth entire in itself. We can see it as a whole. And Einstein said that it's a delusion that we are separate from the whole of creation, and it's a prison for us. And he went on to say that our task is to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of understanding and compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty.
Everything is integrated. Everything is a continuum. Everything is a part of everything else. Like our body is a miniature example of this integrated whole. Our body is matter. Our body is also consciousness. Our body has intellect. Our body has reasoning, rationality, feelings, intuition. Everything is in one body integrated.
And we forget this connection and partnership with nature at our peril, as we're beginning to find out.
In the coming years and decades, our ability to understand the basic principles of ecology and live accordingly will be critical. It will be critical for the survival of humanity.
Humanity has spent the last few centuries extracting every mineral, every drop of water, every bit of fertility from this earth, pumping more pollution than the earth can hold, including all the greenhouse gases that are now changing the climate. I think we've reached a stage where this taking of the gifts of the earth and putting on the earth all our waste and pollutants can only carry on at the cost of our own survival. Within the next century, we face a species test. We will either change our perception to see ourselves as inhabitants of a living earth or walk our way to extinction as a species.
It's clear that the ecological crisis won't be solved just by recycling more or using our cars less. We have to fundamentally change our relationship with the earth and recognize it as a great living being that has sustained life for thousands of millions of years, and not as an inexhaustible storehouse of raw materials. To do this, we have to take a holistic view.
Those who go only for reason and rationality are, in my view, creating an unsustainable future. Those who go only for intuition also create an unsustainable future. But those who can create a dance between intuition and reason, dance between experience and experiment, then I think we can enjoy the world better, and it's a sustainable world.
I'm hopeful about the future, but it's not just science that needs to change. We all need to play our part in this global rescue mission.
This is a great moment of opportunity and a challenge for the environmentally minded, ecologically minded, holistically minded scientists and business leaders and politicians, all of them to come together to see the whole and say that we can address the world crisis of global warming, climate change, resources depleting, population explosion. All these problems that the world faces today can be addressed better if we had a holistic approach.
The ecological problems we face may seem overwhelming, but as well as green technologies and a new economy, an important first step is for all of us to slow down and spend time with nature in the way that Goethe suggested. Then perhaps we can begin to develop a new moral attitude to the Earth, an attitude which could pave the way for a science that combines great discoveries with wisdom and care for the planet.
"400 years ago, the scientific revolution disconnected us from nature in a time of tremendous turmoil. Now, with new dangers and uncertainties, we need another scientific revolution, a holistic science revolution that reconnects us with this amazing planet, our animate Earth."